All too often, when there's a loss to suicide, grief and conversations about that loss gets caught up in the act itself, in suicide. Susan Finley and Sue Henderson from Lothian Speak Their Name are changing that narrative, and they've done it by bringing people together to make a quilt. The quilt is special because every square has been sewn in memory of someone lost to suicide as a heartfelt celebration of their life rather than a focus on how they were lost. Since it was finished, the quilt has been touring Scotland, encouraging conversations about loss and suicide. And on the 30th of March 2026, it is coming to Inverness Cathedral. Ahead of the quilt coming to the Highlands, I joined Susan and Sue from Lothian Speak Their Name to take a closer look at the quilt and to hear their story of how it came about and some of the stories behind the beautiful squares and who they represent. As always, a word of warning, we will be talking very openly about suicide, so if the content gets too much, please do press pause and get some support. You'll find the details for Mikey's line in the show notes. I'm Penny Stewart, and this is Speaking of Suicide. We've got the quilt here in front of us, which is amazing. I've been looking at pictures in the booklet, but actually seeing it in the flesh is quite different. You talk me through some of the squares that we've got here. Sue, point to some of the ones that really capture you and describe them maybe for me.
Yeah. I think the thing when you see the quilt in real life that strikes you is how different they all are, for a start. Yeah. I think if it's one of those things, you give a room full of people the same task to do and they create this, which is so much diversity and different representations of their loved ones and the people that they're remembering. I particularly love, obviously, we like our own because of the memories that they have for us. But this one here, this tree with the butterfly.
That one really caught my eye.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a woman called Lorna who made it to remember her mum, Linda. And she hadn't done any crafts for a very, very long time. And was really a bit anxious about, how am I going to do this and what am I going to do? I don't quite know what stitch I'll use or how this is going to end up looking. And every time she came back to a workshop, she'd done a bit more and she'd done a bit more and she couldn't stop. And as you can see, it is absolutely beautifully full. And, this tree with the blossom on it and then this massive butterfly, which I know there was initially going to be a butterfly for remembrance, but she just absolutely, she loved doing it. And I think so many people have said that part of what they didn't want to stop because making the square, putting the stitches in, whatever it was that they were doing was bringing them closer to their person. So some people just kept adding and thinking, maybe I could do a little bit more. And certainly in Lorna's case, just kept on embroidering and it does look brilliant.
I suppose we should describe what we've actually got in front of us because I was trying to count the number of squares. Do you know off the top of your head, Susan, how many you've got?
49.
Is it?
48.
49 remembering people.
Yes.
But there are 56 altogether.
That's right, yeah.
So 49 made to remember.
And we've got all these different squares on the quilt, which is, I bet you know the dimensions as well, do you?
It is about 150 wide by about 2 metres-ish in height.
It's actually 2.5 metres high by 2 metres 10 wide. I only know that because I have to write that to people all the time.
I'm just looking at it's wonderfully colourful. There's a purple background, and then each square, as you say, is very, very different. And as you look at it, I mean, your eye gets drawn to very different things. There's a wonderful square down here which has got a sun and it's a landscape.
That was actually the first square that we received when we were making the quilt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was the first one to complete her square.
And it
that's
says
for her
Roy.
son. Yeah, that's for her son. And it represents the hills in Edinburgh.
Yep. And it was their favourite place to walk. And I love it because Shirley's, creative and crafty anyway, but I love the kind of joyfulness of that. She's just gone for it. She's absolutely gone for it. And it obviously is a place that was really, really special to them. And what you were saying about the colour of it, often when we're at venues, people will come up, especially when we were at the quilt show. I don't know whether it was the same in Birmingham, but at the Glasgow quilt show, do you remember people would come up and just look at it and say, oh, that's really lovely. It's stories about people, isn't it? And this is before they realised what it was, because the purple and the orange, which are our kind of quilt colours, they're on our logo, and we wanted something that was warm and would draw people in. And they come and they're attracted to it. And then it's almost like a sort of a sharp intake of breath when they realise what the stories are about.
But what a lot of people do say about it is that they can see the love, and it's about how people lived their lives rather than how we lost them. And it is beautiful, and it is also joyful because you can see the things that people enjoy doing and the love within the quilt.
Yeah.
Nature features a lot, doesn't it? In the squares. There's a square there that says Naomi, and it's got a bird singing. You've got some more hills, and it says Dad down there. Birds feature a lot. There's a woodpecker, wonderful woodpecker, up there, and a polar bear, beautiful sunflower. That's clearly something that people are drawn to when they're creating these. It was interesting. You've got the booklet that goes along with the quilt and tells the stories of the different squares. And when I was reading that, something you had written really struck me. And you said, when someone dies by suicide, so often it is the way their life ended that's remembered. Our quilt is redressing the balance. It's about how our loved ones lived their lives and how we remember them. It's about how we keep speaking their names and their stories so that others will know them too. And I totally got that when I was reading it, but I think that jumps out even more when you're standing in front of the actual quilt.
Yeah, I think exactly as Susan said, the thing that strikes people is that this quilt doesn't make you feel sad when you see it. When you start thinking about the stories, it's incredibly poignant.
Yeah.
And there is that depth of sadness behind all of the squares, but the squares in and of themselves are beautiful and uplifting because people took so much time to remember all of the best bits about their person that they wanted to remember. They weren't going to remember the things that they were sad about. That wasn't the point of this.
And that was one of the things that we did at a workshop. If somebody was struggling to think about what to put in their square, we just gave them a piece of paper and said to them, write down anything that, memories from what you've done or memories for what they used to do. And that certainly helped a lot of people with their squares.
Because people would come in and just say, I haven't a clue where to start. I don't know what I'm going to do with this.
Do you think, to some extent, there's something about losing someone to suicide which creates a block in a way that other grief doesn't, maybe in quite the same way, that you've got to push through something in order to get to this point that you have with the quilt to celebrate that life?
Very much so. And there were people who came to our workshops who had never spoken about their loved one or the way in which they died. And when we were planning this, we knew that was one of the things that would be really important, was that if people had never had the chance to talk, that they would come to a safe place where every single person in the room had lost someone in the same way. So whatever was going to happen in that room, it was going to be okay because everybody would get it. And so, for example, where's Siobhan's square there? The fiddle in the middle. this is to remember Siobhan's sister Cerwyn, who was a fiddle player. And it's actually taken from a sketch that Cerwyn had put on a letter that she sent to Siobhan. Siobhan had never talked about Cerwyn's death to anybody. The fact that it was a death by suicide had just made it impossible for her and the family to talk openly about it. And this was almost 5 years later that she came to the workshop, and she knew what she wanted to do. But for the first time, she was sitting with other people and talking about her sister and naming her. And actually, we are called Speak Their Name because we wanted names to be here. This was about having real people remembered, not statistics, because we all know what the statistics are. But this was about individuals who had lived lives, and you can see what their loves were. You can see the people that they were, and they are named, so that when people look at this, they think about Cerwyn, or they think about Zach, or they think about Linda, or whatever. And actually, the action of saying those names out loud and really remembering that they were here,
And remembering
and never missed.
And remembering in a positive way, because the overwhelming sense of standing here in front of this quilt is one of lives that were lived and embraced, and that this is remembering a life, not a death, and that really does jump out.
It does, yeah. And I think the really big thing for if people, the other thing about the quilt is it helps people to start a conversation. If you go up to someone and say, hey, should we have a conversation about suicide and mental health? It's not an easy thing to do. Whereas you start here and you start talking about, oh, here's Mike's heron, which, Mike loved herons, and what was that? It leads you in, and I think that's what has been really powerful about this, is the conversations that we have had with people in different venues around the tour, people who have never talked about their losses. We know they haven't, but they've come and they've seen this, and it has allowed them to talk because they see these lives, they see these people remembered here. And one of the things that we were really, really keen to do was to start those conversations with people, but especially if somebody's struggling with their mental health and may have been to one of those really dark places. These squares show that all of these people who we've remembered here are still loved, still missed, and they lived these big lives. These aren't people who were sitting sadly in a bedroom somewhere being sad and miserable. These are people who, as you say, they were out in the world. Whatever these references to nature or whatever activities these people did are remembering, they were out in the world living big lives, and still their lives ended in that incredibly isolated and lonely way. And what we do know is people have seen this, and they've been in those dark places, and they have gone and sought help.
And yeah, because we got chatting to a gentleman at the quilt show, and he had heard of the quilt and had read about it and had said that it had saved his life because he had seen how much everybody was loved, and he decided to seek help rather than taking his own life.
Which is extraordinary and wonderful, and amazing that he could share that with you. Is there something about gathering together to make something like this that is freeing, that it opens up the ability to be able to talk about someone you've lost and loved in this very positive way? I mean, what are the ingredients that allow that to take place, do you think, Susan?
I think a lot of it was when we were just all sitting round at the workshops, busy doing something with your hands. You're then free to just chat generally. So I think people just being in a safe environment, being able to speak if they wanted to, but also just talking about the individual in such a positive way allowed people to, feel safe to talk about their individuals.
I think that's exactly right. And Susan and I were involved with a kind of craft group for years and years here with a bunch of friends. And we knew how important that was, that if you're actively engaged in some community craft activity, the talking just happens alongside it. So it's like I was saying, if you sit down with somebody or stand facing them and say, let's talk about this very serious issue, that's going to be really, really difficult. Whereas if you have something slightly distracting, that is a hook, a way in to those conversations, it makes the difficult conversations much, much easier, I think.
What, to me, I'm sure you also have with the quilt and creating these squares, is a space that is safe because it is absolutely stigma-free.
Absolutely.
Because everybody has had different experiences, but that common experience, that I imagine is an important part of this.
It was really important, and it was also important for people to know that it was a safe space. If they wanted to talk, they were free to talk, but if they didn't want to talk, it didn't matter. They were just free to get on, make their square, because some people didn't. There's one square there that the lady came in, made it and left.
Yeah, didn't
But
want
she
to
got-
engage. She
yeah.
needed to make
She
something to
needed
remember.
it, yeah. She wanted to make the square to remember. She knew it was a safe space, and she knew there wouldn't be any questions asked.
I'm conscious we've gone kind of diving straight into the quilt, and I haven't really heard your stories and how this all came about and how you met. So let's kind of turn to that. But maybe we can do that through looking at your squares. Susan, do you want to take me to your square first of all?
So this is my square, and it is for my dad, who I lost 28 years ago. It's a beach scene. A lot of people have said to me that it looks like a beach near where they live, but it was completely just a generic beach, because my dad loved the water, loved he was in the Navy, he loved being at sea, he was Sea Cadet Commander, so the water had a big part of his life. Whenever we went out on a walk as a family on camping trips, we would always end up near water somehow, usually in it because we couldn't get back across it. And in the beach, or on the beach, is all the names that my dad was known by. James, Jimmy, Jim, husband, brother, uncle, son. And Grandad's also there. He doesn't know or didn't know, wasn't alive whenever his grandchildren were born, but we do talk about him, and he's known as Grandad to all the grandchildren. So yeah, this is my square.
It's a calm beach. It's waves or just ripples onto the sand. It looks like a very calm space. Was that intentional?
No, it just kind of came out like that as I was sort of piecing the fabric together, and the way I made it was basically ripping up pieces of fabric, and it was just how they lay, so it just came together quite naturally and organically rather than being sort of constructed, if that makes sense.
And how did it feel putting your loss and grief down in this creative way?
It was really lovely to actually get something down that represented my dad, because there's very few photos of my dad because he was always behind the camera, and it was good to get something that represented him as a whole and not just dad, because he was known so well within the community. He was obviously had my brother and sister as well, and all his nieces and nephews, so it was just really lovely to get something down that represented him as a whole.
Sue, do you want to come and show us your square?
So this is my square for John, who was my husband. That is not what I initially planned my square to look like. You pointed out the one with Dad on it. That's the one that Ailey, my daughter, made for John. And when I was originally thinking about it, I was thinking, I think because John loved the mountains and he loved the sea, he scuba dived and he climbed and hiked. And I thought, right, I'm going to do something with mountains and the sea. And then when Ailey decided she wanted to do one, she said, I think I'm going to do something with the mountains and the sea. So I then had to do all the other things that represent John. And I just, like Susan said at the workshops, I just did this massive brainstorm list. And as you can see, he was a bit of a kind of all-rounder. He loved all and any activity, a lot of big physical activities, so the windsurfer and tent, which we did a lot of camping back in the day, skiing, running shoes, a fin to represent his diving. But there was the other side to him, which was much quieter. So there's headphones, which he used to love, just sitting reading a book with some classical music playing. The little boat hull, that's a model boat hull. He used to make beautiful model boats. He always finished at just the hull. He never got to cabins or anything. He just loved the shape of the hulls. And in the middle is this big backpack, which partly represents the fact that he was a hiker, but a traveller. He loved travelling. He went around the world after he left university. But a friend, John had made 2 attempts on his life, the final one, but about 10 years earlier, and had been found at that point. And a friend who he was talking to subsequently had said to him, look, I know you have to walk this path really by yourself, but if there's any time ever when you feel you can share the load with me, I'll carry that load for you. So it's partly a nod to that offer from our lovely friend John, but it's also just it's about all the things that John did with backpacks. Oh, and there's also a furry Yeti boot on it, because he had a pair of furry Yeti boots that he wore quite a lot. And what I wanted was that whoever came to see this would recognise something of him in it. So it's all of him. But what it's not is the bits of his life which were less, because he worked for the bank until he died. That was not going to go on there. That was not a great bit of his life. There are all sorts of bits on there which aren't, bits which aren't on there, which didn't need to be remembered. But those are the bits of things that he loved. And, that's what the quilt's about.
And so how does it feel for you each time you see this quilt in the way it is now, hung up, and you get to re-encounter John? How does it feel meeting him in this way?
I love the fact that it remembers the good bits of him, because there were some really difficult bits in the years we spent together. But I think Susan was saying about the process of making her square for her dad. It was a really lovely process, because literally, and there's stitching, it was mostly stitching in mine. Every stitch, I was thinking about all of those good things. And I think because an awful lot of memories had become entangled with the more difficult stuff, that was a really lovely thing, was to actively be thinking about all of these brilliant things that he was and that he did. And that was really lovely. And in answer to re-encountering John, whenever we are putting the quilt up or we're with it, I think it's the holistic thing. And we're so, we're putting the quilt up, we're, organising and doing all of that. I think the thing I feel most about it is that all of these people who are remembered are together. Mm-hmm. We created a community in real life of real people who are still here and who have lost their loved ones. But there is some comfort, I think, to know that in this space, the people who died are not completely alone. And I don't know if that sounds a bit daft.
No, not at all.
But I do feel that quite strongly.
A comment on one of the posts that we did on Facebook, and it mentioned somebody on the quilt, and they said they're now on tour with their new band.
Yeah.
Which, just sums it up.
Yeah.
Beautifully, because we are touring it around and we're taking it to all these different places, and these people are together.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How did this all come about in the first place? Well, I guess, how did you two meet in the first place?
That's really a long
time ago. Our children went to the same primary school together, and Sue's children are a little bit older than mine. And we met through the fundraising committee or some committee at the school.
Yeah,
and then, as Sue said, we also went to a craft clinic, as we called it, where we met every week and did various crafting activities.
It was an excuse when we all had young kids to get together and do the things we loved doing, but we really didn't have time.
Yeah.
When we were looking after the kids.
Mm-hmm. So
And
couple
also-
of hours a week,
and
a cup of
eating
tea,
cake.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cake
Cake
was important.
yeah, definitely.
And,
And that was important through the workshops as well,
It
actually.
was, it was. And I think the thing about the craft group was that people would come and just bring the thing they were working on, but people learnt from each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if, for example, you know, somebody was sewing or knitting or making jewellery or whatever, other people would see it and think, oh, I've never done that. I might fancy a try of that. And so there was a sort of sharing of skills, and that happened in the workshops, didn't
Absolutely,
it?
yeah. Because there was one lady finished her square and kept coming back to the workshops because she loved being in the
Yeah.
workshop so much, and she was helping other people out, which was really
Yeah.
lovely.
And people who'd not done anything creative
Yeah.
for years, who have rediscovered it and are still doing it, having done it and found out how therapeutic it was and how they could be really quite mindful. And that's been really important, I
Yeah.
think, that it's helped people. All the stuff we've done, I think that actually the workshops and the creative stuff, but anything that lifts people out of their grief and the difficult stuff that they're dealing with is really beneficial. So yeah, we've got a lot of renewed crafts
Yes.
going on with a lot of these people.
It sounds like it works on all kinds of different levels. The actual process of it, giving your brain the space
Yeah.
to grieve,
Yeah.
digest,
Yeah.
to revisit the positive stuff, to
Exactly.
create,
Yeah.
as well as being in this space where you can or can't
Yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah.
How did you two realise that you had this shared life experience of suicide? Can you remember? You're both shaking your head and
No.
looking at each other in surprise.
I don't actually know how we found out.
Because it's a really good question though, actually, because it's not, as we know and as we've discovered doing this, it is not something that you go around talking about. I mean, we do now because
Yeah.
we've done this,
Yeah.
but you didn't. So it must have come out in a conversation
Somewhere,
somehow.
probably over cake and tea. or
Exactly,
something.
exactly. You know.
I honestly cannot remember how we realised.
And then it wasn't something that we talked about a lot.
No.
But it was when I had the idea to do this. And I thought, I know a person who not only runs a quilt business, but also lost her father in the same way that I lost my husband. And that was probably, honestly, because it is not that we went around, I don't think,
No.
thinking, there goes Susan who lost her dad to suicide, or vice versa. But
yeah, no, we didn't really talk about it at
No.
all. It's probably only been since we've started doing the quilt we've
Yeah,
really talked about it.
exactly. And I do think that's the case for a lot of people as well. You maybe have one big conversation where you realise you have that shared experience and you talk about what that was like, and you have the big conversation, and then you file that away as this is a person who gets it, but then you get on with the rest of life. And for some people that might be enough. But I think for other people, you know, we have a lot of people who are involved with us who have been to various support groups, continue to go to them and find great support with that. Other people, I never wanted to go to a support group. John died 24 years ago, just after our second child, our son was born. And at that point, I just didn't want to be in a space with other people who were dealing with their grief. My grief was bad enough, and I was trying to raise two babies. So, you know, I didn't want to do that. But I know that it's incredibly valuable for other people. So, yeah.
So, but where did the idea come from? Because, you know,
Yep.
we're doing this
A
whole
moment of
interview
madness.
in reverse, aren't we?
Indeed, we are. Yes, yes. So it's a good way to do it. So the idea came when I was actually laid up with COVID. I was stuck in the house, and I had a bag full of bits which were going to make a quilt for my daughter, which had to be done on the machine, and I don't normally do machine quilting, and I just hadn't had time, and I was stuck quarantining myself. So I made this quilt for Ailey, and I'd just done an interview about a book that I'd written about our experiences as a family bereaved by suicide with a different charity, and I'd been thinking, what can I do to raise awareness of suicide? I always knew after John died that I would want to do something in the suicide community, but I wasn't going to set up a charity. There was nothing like that I wanted to do. And I was making this quilt, and I thought, there have been memory quilts or memorial quilts for different issues, the AIDS memorial quilt or, whatever. And I thought, maybe a quilt in memory of people who've died by suicide. And then we get all of these things we've talked about, the crafts, the coming together, like-minded people in a safe space, making a network of people who might not have found each other so far, helping people to talk, all of that, and then creating a memorial. So then I had a Google and discovered that actually at that point there were 2 memory quilts in England. There was the Manchester quilt, which was the first one commissioned by Manchester City Council, and then Yorkshire came off the back of that. So both of them went under the Speak Their Name umbrella, and when I pulled a bit of a team together, we decided we'd be part of the same family. And I approached Susan first because I knew that with our sort of shared bereavement, but also, as I said, very useful quilting experience. What you see before you is based on Susan's absolute quilt genius. Just the logistics of putting that together. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened. And then I had a few contacts with other people, and we drew a team together, and in the end, actually, there were quite a few people on that team.
Yeah. But we had kind of thought at the start that maybe it would just be a little get-together every now and then, and it kind of grew much bigger than what we thought.
So how did it work in practice, Susan?
Well, it took us about a year of planning, which we hadn't really envisaged before we even ran our first workshop. But we were trying to get funding and then setting up all the community interest company bits and pieces, all the stuff that goes on in the background. And then we ran our first workshop, I think it was in January 24.
Yep.
And that we'd had our first meeting in January 23. So it literally did take us a full year to pull everything together. And the first workshops, we'd advertised them through a few support groups we knew and also on Eventbrite. So people were booking onto them. But it was one of those things, we didn't know how many people were going to turn up. It'd just be myself and Sue and the other volunteers sitting twiddling our thumbs. But the first workshop, and I can't remember how many we had, but it was pretty full.
I think there were about 20 people. That one.
And they came along and started making their squares. And one thing that we did notice when people were booking onto Eventbrite was they would maybe book on 1 or 2 times but not turn up. But then the third time they would appear. And, it was, we were aware of that. And sort of.
And people have said since, haven't they, that actually it was so anxiety-provoking, the thought of walking into this room full of strangers, even though it clearly was going to be a room full of strangers who were all in the same situation. But it did take people 2 or 3 attempts to come. And I suspect there are people who did sign up and didn't come.
They did, yeah.
And there were also people who came who were really convinced they were going to make a square and just weren't at the right
ready,
stage, the too raw in their grief still, who I think will join the next phase of the project.
Hopefully,
but it just wasn't the right time for them just yet. But yeah, that was how it happened. It made it sound really easy.
Yeah, I know it does, doesn't it? So we ran workshops up until June.
Yeah.
June or July last year.
Well, I think June, we were desperately saying, this is the absolute final deadline, and somebody was still delivering a square literally the day before we started sewing it together.
And then I think we spent a week putting it all together, and and then we started we had our launch.
We did.
Which
that was a great day.
Yeah, sort of celebration of the quilt, of the individuals in the quilt. And
it was the first time that the makers had seen it. Yeah. Obviously, we'd seen it, and I think that was it. Maybe the other directors.
One of the other directors had seen it.
Yeah, but that was it.
Else.
So nobody else had seen it.
Were there any surprises along the way? Because you had this idea, Sue, to make the quilt. You got other people on board, but I wondered if the actual process of it brought things that you maybe hadn't anticipated in terms of, I don't know, how much it has allowed people to grieve, celebrate, or whatever? Have there been some surprises along the way?
I think the community that we built
Yeah.
has been a massive surprise to me. It wasn't anything I really considered when we were pulling the project together, that, you know, I have met some incredible people over the last 3 years, and I think they will remain friends forever. And I think that goes for a lot of the makers as well. They've built a network, and we now know that some of them now meet up on a regular basis. So that has been a massive surprise. Well, it shouldn't have really been a surprise, but what I hadn't envisaged it happening to the extent it did.
Yeah, and it's not a surprise, but the thing that I am constantly struck by is the courage of all of these people. Some people, one mum made a square for her son, who was 14 when he died, and it was less than a year since he died when she came to the first workshop. And for people who are so immersed in their grief, and she wears her grief still very openly, to be able to literally get up every morning, to still be able to put one foot in front of the other, it blows me away, but constantly. And we're surrounded by these people all the time, but the fact that these people are still living their lives, that takes huge bravery, but it's also an incredible legacy to these people who they are determined are not going to be forgotten. And that is incredible.
To what extent did it also open your eyes to just how widely suicide touches people? I mean, how broad a kind of demographic or range of people did you have coming to the workshops?
That was one thing that maybe not so much disappointed us, but I can't really think of another word for it. But the demographic that we had coming to the workshop was very, very small. We tried to tap into a lot of different groups that we just didn't want to engage.
Groups where we know that the suicide rate is high.
Yeah.
So, for example,
the farming community,
the military, people involved with, prison, whether the family's outside or people who've been through the prison system, but also different ethnic communities as well. And we did a lot of trying to engage beforehand, and we didn't get
and I think
very many.
Every single square, or not every single square, the majority of those squares have all been made by females. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 that have had input from men.
But actually made by women.
Yeah.
And we were really keen to get men involved. And we know, of course, that the statistics are that 3 times more men than women take their own lives. But there are a lot of men who are bereaved and who are also living with their own mental health issues as a result of their bereavement, even if they didn't have those mental health difficulties before. So we were really keen. I think there will be more now. I think now that when we get guys coming and looking at the quilt, they understand it. I think when we were trying to talk about a quilt to men, especially some of the guys we know through Andy's Man Club, I remember having this conversation with one of the guys in charge, who is just a gorgeous guy, but he's really blokey. And I'm sitting there talking about a quilt, and I could just see this look on his face. He's like, what? A quilt? What's that about?
Yeah, with all respect, crafting is probably a bit of a female domain, isn't it? So
exactly. And we kept saying, you can make something in woodwork or metal or anything you do, or print it, do anything. It doesn't have to be sewing. But I think they get it now.
Yeah.
I think they really get it.
And Andy's Man Club have been brilliant.
They have been some of our best allies.
Yeah,
exactly.
Totally.
Yeah.
So you made the quilt, you pulled it together, and it's now on tour, or doing a tour. And so that's been a whole new part of this project. And presumably then able to touch that some of those demographics, or a wider demographic that you weren't able to in the actual process of making the quilt. Where has it been so far?
Oh, wow. Central Edinburgh, it's been into St John's, where we held our launch event. So it was in St John's for a month after that, and then it returned to St John's
This summer.
this summer, yeah.
And it did a month around West Lothian.
Yep.
Earlier in the year. It's been out to the furthest extremes of East Lothian. It's been down to Mid Lothian. It's been around. It's been in churches have been our absolutely most brilliant allies in this, because I think they have a really established community themselves, and even churches who aren't being used for religious reasons anymore have become community hubs. So there's been an awful lot of that. But local libraries,
Scottish Parliament.
We were in the Parliament. Yep. We've been to quilt fairs. We were at the Scottish Storytelling Centre. So yeah, it's been around, and we really tried to find places where we would get as many people seeing it as possible. We're aware that there are some places we've managed to get it into community centres who have a really interestingly diverse community using them, but we wanted footfall. We just wanted people to see it, because the whole point when we started was that we wanted it to start conversations, and there's no point in it being places where there aren't people seeing it who will then start those conversations. So I think it's worked, and now we're about to start our Scottish tour.
I mean, presumably you can't be with it the whole time while people are having those conversations. But to what extent have you got an idea of the kind of conversations it's provoked, or the reactions it's provoked? Have you had feedback?
We've got a visitor's book that travels with the quilt, and we've had some amazing comments in that visitor's book. Some really, really beautiful comments about the quilt, and
but
also
people naming their person as well,
Yes.
which has been lovely. Actually, people remembering the person that they've lost,
even though they're not on the quilt, and via social media as well, because we're posting up where it is, and again, people commenting on that. So that we know that it is reaching people, and it is starting conversations, and we get feedback from the people who run the venues as well.
Yeah, and we often hold events when it's in a particular place. So just a kind of drop-in event, people can just come and meet with representatives from different charities or organisations, get support if they need it, just see the quilt, have some chat, and those have been really helpful actually, because they're very low key. But people have said, oh, I'll maybe get involved with the next quilt panel making, or oh, I might get involved to help in some other way with one of the charities that we're able to put them in touch with. So it's been really helpful in that way. Like we thought, I think what you were saying about the things that we've been surprised by, we said we hoped it would start conversations. We said we hoped it would save lives. We didn't really believe that. And yet we now have the evidence that has happened. So it is pretty amazing, actually.
Something that strikes me, it struck me on looking at the booklet you've got that goes and tells the story of the quilt, but also very much standing here in front of it, the stories, what jumps out is love and a celebration, but actually, for me, what jumps out as well is pride, and that strikes me as interesting, because we don't put pride and suicide in the same space usually. And I wondered how much you had that sense of actually you've created something which allows that pride to take place. Is that something that you found in this?
A lot of people have said to me that we should be really, really proud of what we've pulled together. And a lot of people have said, oh, your dad would be so proud of what you've pulled together. And I often think, would he? Because my dad was never one for being centre of attention, and now the thought that he's going to be in this quilt forever, I'm sure he would be, but yeah, with maybe a little bit of reservation as well. But yeah. And, I often think, and, from the first conversation Sue and I had, I didn't think it was going to be as big as it is. And yeah, I'm proud of what we've achieved as well as the individuals. So proud of the individuals that had the courage to come along.
Yeah.
And
they are proud of themselves.
Yes.
They're proud of what they've done. That what I was saying earlier about just having the courage to come and be part of the process, but also proud of what they've created. But the pride in their people. And exactly as you said, Penny, you know, just... We've talked before about the stigma. That's the thing that most people are left with. Most people don't know how to talk to somebody who's lost somebody to suicide, because that is a really dark thing, and it's an incredibly sad end to a life, and that's all people think about. Whereas this is absolutely saying, look at these amazing things that our loved ones achieved in their lives when they were here with us, and yeah, they're proud of their people, and rightly, people say to us, all of our makers say, I am so proud of what we've done, and we tell them that all the time. I mean, you know, we message often, and we say we are so proud of what you've done, but we're, you know, proud of these people who we're remembering as well.
Absolutely.
So as to the future, the quilt's going to continue going around on its Scottish tour. For anyone who can't get to see it, are they able to get a copy of the booklet? And if so, how do they do that?
Yes, they can buy a copy of the book. It is available via our links on our social media, both Facebook and Instagram, and also they could email us at Lothian Speak Their Name.
We will put all those links in the show note. It's been wonderful to see it and have a kind of a private viewing, it feels like. I'm interested, you know, this has obviously been a really a full-on project for both of you, and you've put yourselves into this quilt, and you've put your people into this quilt. What have you learned about you, or what has changed for you and your grief or process of celebration as a result of doing this? Sue's looking horrified at that question. So I'm going to go to Susan first.
You didn't hear the conversation we had just before you arrived.
I think being able to put my dad into the quilt, and it started conversations within our family that we'd never had before, and I think it's answered a lot of questions within our family, which has been hugely positive. And for me, just meeting all the amazing people that I have met, as I said before, you know, these people would never have been in my life had I not done this quilt. And Sue and I knew each other before we did it, but I think we know each other so much more now in the past 3 years through all the different things going on behind the scenes with the quilt. And
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It has been, I wouldn't have had anybody else I would have wanted to do this with, genuinely. We have kept each other going and ranted and raved at the same time. But in terms of where it has left me, I think I feel much more at peace with my memories of John. I think what is on that square is how I want to remember him. And I have filed all the other stuff away. And I think this process has really helped do that. And also because I always knew I would want to do something within the suicide community to raise awareness. The fact that we've also brought this brilliant group of people together is a complete bonus. But yeah, that's kind of where it is.
Thank you both so much for inviting me along today, and I can't wait to see the quilt on display in Inverness and hear some of the conversations that it prompts. Thank you.
That's too brilliant. Thank you very much.
Sue Henderson and Susan Finley. The Lothian Speak Their Name quilt will be on display in Inverness Cathedral from the 30th of March to the 25th of April. If you're in the Highland capital, do go and see it. It is a remarkably thought-provoking and beautiful piece of work. And if you're listening to this after the quilt has departed but feel inspired to find out more, then head for the show notes where we've put all the links you'll need, including how to get in touch with Mikey's Line if the issues raised in this episode means you'd like some support. If you'd like to share your story with us, then we would love to hear from you. You can email bethechange, that's all one word, bethechange@mikeysline.co.uk. And please do follow, like and share this podcast so others can find us more easily. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line. The podcast host is supported by Highlands-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. And the podcast is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited. Adventurous Audio. From idea to ear.